Otherwise, uh, when we'll be able to. So we'll discuss. Sriram is in office. Uh, yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So we are recording, and moreover, I need to share the screen. Yeah. Yes. So this is what we started with. We tried to study machine learning models, and in that decision tree, neural networks, regression, and clustering. And before that, why do we use these things? Basically, to classify the data. Yeah, classify the data, or sometimes predict what will happen for a given input. For that, we are doing all these things. So basically, these models fall under three categories. What are the types of machine learning? Do you recollect types of machine learning? Supervised, unsupervised, and reinforced learning. Yeah. So this this slide we discussed. Yeah, supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. So supervised means you are in everything. We are sort of training the model. You're training the model. So while training in supervised learning, we are giving the output also. Output as an example as well. We are of course giving the input in all the types of learning, but in supervised, we are also giving the output. If this is the input, this should be the output. If this is the input, this should be the output. So like that, when we are doing, we call it supervised learning. Unsupervised learning is when we are uh, setting the model free to learn by itself, like clustering. Like clustering we discussed. So we are not telling how to form the clusters or how many clusters should be there. Yeah, so the model itself will try to form clusters. In that, we are not specifying the output. Yeah, how many clusters, what will be the cluster's name, etc. So we are not specifying the output. That is called unsupervised learning. Reinforced learning, we have not seen that much. Basically, what we have discussed falls under either supervised learning or unsupervised learning. Okay. So these are the types of machine learning. And as far as machine learning models are concerned, we have discussed 4 models. In that, we have seen an example of decision tree. Yeah, on Tuesday from the late evening session, we have seen a detailed example of decision trees. Today, we will see regression and clustering. Neural networks, we cannot simulate as such. Yeah, only the real working we can witness. So neural network also we will discuss again the broad outline, but we won't be able to solve problems as such because everything will be uh, an assumption. So suppose this model assumed this much weight for this input. So it will be a series of assumptions only. So it won't look very wholesome. Yeah. So neural network, we won't be able to see an example of the inner working. That's why perhaps it is also called black box model. So what happens inside the model, we cannot write by hand. You cannot, it will be very difficult to write with pen and paper. Yeah. So let us come to regression. So regression, basically, we have discussed how to form the regression line for simple linear regression. So there are some additional things in regression, yeah, we have seen if there are different points given like this, yeah, this is the independent variable. This is the dependent variable. So in regression, basically, we are trying to fit a line of best fit. Yeah. So, this doesn't seem quite right. Yeah, will be somewhere. Yeah. So this is one case, but not everything will be linear or just one variable, one independent variable. Dependent variable can be one, dependent variable will be one, but independent variable can be more than one also. In that case, what do? We keep increasing the dimension of the plot. So if there are two independent variables, we will try to draw in a 3D space. Yeah. Similarly, if there are three independent variables, we will try to imagine. Yeah. Beyond 3D, we will only have to imagine or logically try to satisfy ourselves that we are drawing the figure in higher and higher dimensions. So if there are say three independent variables, the equation will look something like this. So x is one independent variable, say x1 is one independent variable, x2 is another independent variable, and x3 is another independent variable. Plus there could be a constant. So all these coefficients we will be finding, which will be certainly more difficult than what we did just for one single case. What we did was basically this much. So as we try to find out more coefficients, as we try to include more independent variables, the process becomes little more complex. Okay. So these are the regression coefficients, beta 1, beta 2, these are the regression coefficients. Yeah. So this is how much influence, beta 1 denotes how much influence this variable x1 has on this dependent variable y. Similarly, beta 2 represents how much influence x2 as an independent variable has on y variable, the variable y, that is the dependent variable, and so on. Yeah. So this is one part, regression coefficient is one part. We also saw R square. Yeah. We also saw R square. I hope you remember how to calculate that. Yeah. This denotes how well the regression line fits the data, fits the given data or past data. Yeah. Suppose R square is 0.75. So we can roughly say that 75% of the variation in data is explained by our regression line, our regression equation. Okay. So R square denotes how good our regression is. So one important thing to notice is as we keep on including more and more independent variables, this R square will keep on changing. First, suppose we have only one variable x1. Yeah, then we will get some R square. Then we include one more variable x2. The R square will change. R square will increase or decrease. Yeah. Then we include the third variable x3. Again, R square will change. It will increase or decrease. So this will R square will tell us whether including an additional independent variable is allowing us to predict better. Is including an additional variable making sense? That will be given by this R square. That indication will be given by this R square. Okay. So if R square increases, then our regression equation is becoming better. If it is not increasing, or it is remaining same, or it is increasing only a little bit, then it doesn't make sense to include one more variable. Okay. This is one important point which you definitely have to keep in mind. Yeah. You can write your own in short form, yeah, but you will be able to recollect and revise later. Yeah. So only when R square increases, we should include an additional variable. That is the point. And one more important thing is, between these two, between any two independent variable, there should not be a lot of correlation. Yeah. Correlation shows what? Correlation shows if the variables are varying together. To what extent two variables are varying together. If two independent variables are varying together a lot, then it doesn't make sense to include both of them. It makes more sense to just include one of them. That will be enough to predict the dependent variable. Yeah. So if there is too much correlation, then you should not include both the variables. Only one of them you should include. Yeah. Correlation can be high between two variables. Correlation can be high between even three variables or four variables. So if correlation is high, just include one variable, yeah, depending on your judgment. Okay. If correlation is high, that problem is called multi-collinearity. High correlation will give rise to multi-collinearity. This is a problem. This is one of the things we should be alert. I'm not sure about the spelling. Sometimes it is spelled with double L also. Yeah. So this is one thing you have to be alert about while using regression. Some softwares even check if there is a high correlation between two independent variables or two or more independent variables, then it will give you a alert message, multi-collinearity detected. Yeah, like that. Yeah. So this is one part, R square and then multi-collinearity. Then what we discussed, what we developed an equation for is linear regression. But sometimes when the data is suppose like this, yeah, so we can see there is some pattern. There is some pattern like this. But if we calculate the linear regression, it will be, it will give a very low R square. Yeah. If we try to fit a line to this data, this second data set, then our R square will be very less. But we know, we can see from the graph that there is some pattern, there is some trend. So in that case, we can use non-linear regression. Non-linear regression makes more sense here. Yeah. Then the regression equation will have different terms. Yeah, different kinds of terms. Here, all the independent variables has power 1. So if it is a curvilinear graph, then it will not be just degree 1. So x1 can be, say, cube. plus beta 2 x2 can be, say, square, like that. So square cube terms, and sometimes even log terms, yeah, log of x3, yeah, things like that, exponential power, yeah. So things like that we have to fit and see whether the graph we get by this line, by this equation, resembles our original graph here, original data's graph. So whichever fits better, we will choose that regression equation, not just this linear regression equation. We are free to choose non-linear regression equation if we have reasons to believe or doubt. Yeah, in this case, believe and doubt are synonymous. Yes. So if we have reasons to try to explore that, non-linear graph will fit better. So non-linear graphs equation will be something like this, with square terms, cube terms, e to the power x terms, and things like that. Yeah. So this is about non-linear regression. In non-linear regression also, this R square calculation will be same. Yeah. Based on the predicted value and the original value. Yeah. That is what R square is based on. Predicted value and original value. Yeah. So these are two. So we are going deeper into regression. We are going a little deeper into regression. So non-linear regression we discussed. Then there is one more case where rather than the dependent variable, we try to calculate the probability of different outcomes of dependent variable. So for example, rather than plotting 10 here, we will plot what is the probability of getting a 10. Yeah, what is the probability of getting a 20, like that. Yeah. So in that case, the sort of graph we get is is called a sigmoid curve or a S-shaped curve sometimes. So it is like this. Yeah, I hope this is visible, or I can write in a different color. Yeah. So this is called the case of logistics regression. Logistic, not S at the end, logistic regression. Yeah. And this function on y-axis, when we are converting the outcome into probability of that outcome, that is called logit function. The act of converting outcome into the probability of those outcomes is called logit function. Yeah. And the graph is something like this. And in that case also, to further simplify, what we do or statisticians do is when we demarcate a threshold value of probability. Yeah. Say threshold value of probability, say it is 0.5 or 0.4. Yeah, in this case we have taken 0.5. So for whichever outcome the probability will be less than 0.5, say this outcome. Yeah. So this outcome, this probability is 0.5. So we will consider it has not considered, it has not crossed the threshold. So the probability of this outcome is 0. For some other outcomes, if the probability is greater than 0.5, say this outcome has probability 0.7, the outcome represented here has probability 0.7, then we will say the outcome is 1. So in logistic regression, the outcome is binomial. Outcome, a binary. Outcome is binary. 1 or 0. When probability is less than the threshold probability, that is less than 0.5, then we will say outcome is 0. When the probability of an outcome is greater than 0.5, then we will say the outcome of this logistic regression is 1. So the dependent variable, this y, in this case will be 1 or 0, binary. Yeah. So this case is of logistic regression. It makes sense when the outcome is binary, like rain or no rain. Yeah. Or if there are two political parties, this party will win or that party will win, if we are trying to predict that. And there are a lot of independent variables. So we can use logistic regression like this. So have you understood the basic concept of logistic regression?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Oscar.
Yes,
Yes, okay. Sriram is in meetings. Yes. Yes. So, yeah. So linear regression, non-linear regression, and logistic regression. So that was about regression. Okay. Now, what is next? Regression we have seen. So basically, to arrive at the regression equation, we have to check for all these things. Whether linear regression makes sense, whether non-linear regression, including a square of the independent variable rather than just the independent variable makes sense, or log of the independent variable rather than just the independent variable makes sense. So we have to check for all those things. The way to check is on the effect of R square. If R square becomes closer to 1 or moves closer to 1, then we are doing something right. Yeah, in regression. So the next model we will discuss is clustering. Yes. Okay. So in clustering, what we are trying to do is, see, these are the suppose now we have this kind of data points. So now we are not trying to fit a line or a curve to this. What we are interested in now is how we can group these outcomes together. Yeah. Whether grouping like this makes sense, or whether grouping these two together and this third together makes sense. So these decisions we take in clustering. So how do we do that? Yeah. So what we will do is, when these points are given, so we will randomly select few centroids. Yeah. See, this one centroid or midpoint, randomly selecting. This one centroid we selected, the green oval shaped points, almost oval shape. Yeah. Yeah. So in first step, we randomly selected these 3 points. Then we will see how far each of these points are from this oval shaped point. Yeah. So we will see for a given data point, say this data point at the top left hand corner. Yeah, this data point is closest to which of these randomly selected centroids or randomly selected midpoints. So to whichever point it is closest, we will put this data point, this original data point in that cluster. Similarly, we will see for this data point here. This is closest to which uh, midpoint. Now these clusters are not there already. Yeah, we are beginning. We are trying to identify how to find out clusters. Yeah, just the points are there, and we have randomly chosen 3 midpoints. So if we are considering this data point, this triangle, so this is nearest to which midpoint? Is it nearest to this midpoint or is it nearest to this midpoint? So depending on that, we will put this data point in that cluster. Similarly, we will see, suppose if there is a point here. So we will see whether it is nearest to this data point, this midpoint, or the third midpoint, which is at the left corner, this one. Yeah, there's the third midpoint. So depending on that, whichever distance is closest, we will put this particular data point in that cluster. So once such a initial cluster is formed, yeah, I'll draw it again. Yeah. So once such a initial, every data point will be closest to one of these midpoints, one of these 3 midpoints. Yeah. It is not necessary to choose just 3 midpoints. You can choose 4, or you can choose 2, or you can choose any number. It is customary to choose between 2 and 3 to begin with. So once we do that, once we form the initial clusters, then depending on what cluster is formed, say this cluster is formed. Yeah, because these 3 points were found to be closest to the closest midpoint for these 3 points was found to be this midpoint, this centroid at the left. Yeah. Then we form this cluster. Now we will calculate the centroid of this cluster. That is, actually calculate the midpoint of these 3 data points, original data points. So suppose the actual midpoint comes to be this. Yeah. Similarly, we will actually calculate the midpoint of these 3 data points. Suppose the midpoint comes to be this. So earlier, this green point was the randomly chosen midpoint. Now the actual midpoint of this cluster after the first round of calculations is the black oval shape. Similarly, if we try to calculate the actual midpoint of this cluster, will be like this. Yeah. Then again we will see each data point. Now we will forget what cluster we formed. After getting these midpoints, for each data point, we will see the data points are closest to which of these new midpoints, the black oval shapes, the new midpoints. Again, for each data point, each original data point, we will see that data point is nearest to which of these new midpoints or new centroids, the black oval shapes. Then depending on that, we will again form a cluster. Yeah. Suppose, just for example, there is a point here. Yeah. There is a point here. Now, depending on the new calculations, we find that it is nearer to this center point, this midpoint. So we will include all these four in one cluster. Yeah. Okay. Then in the next point, we will calculate the centroid of these 4 points. Suppose when we do that in the next round, we find the centroid somewhere like this. Okay. So like this, we will keep doing this till this centroid stabilizes. These centroids do not move. The new centroid calculated comes on the old centroid. This will eventually stop shifting if we have chosen more or less the correct number of means, correct number of centroids, that is k-means, we call it k-means clustering. If the number of means, in this case we have chosen three, yeah, if that is correct, then this centroids will eventually stabilize. They will not move any further after a couple of rounds of these calculations. If they keep moving, then we will either increase the k or decrease the k and do all this calculation of cluster formulation. When we arrive at a stabilized set of means, when the centroids or the midpoints do not move anymore, they stabilize, we know that we have chosen the right k, right number of midpoints. So this is about clustering. Have you understood k-means clustering? And in that we have briefly looked at k-means clustering.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So one more thing we saw, that is we are trying with different number of k's, right? And on the y-axis, we can say the average distance. Average distance from the means or center points. See, average distance. So if this is the center point, this distance, this distance, this distance, this distance. So we'll calculate the total and divide by the number of distances. So if we plot this graph, so we will see that there is a, it shows a sharp turn somewhere. Yeah. So it could be something like that. Yeah. So beyond this point, increasing the number of k is not showing us, giving us any result. So average distance from the means is not showing any different result beyond this point. Yeah. So we will choose this point as the desired k. The k corresponding to this elbow as the desired k for our problem. Okay, this briefly we discussed last time also. So this is about k-means clustering. Then there is hierarchical clustering, which, yeah, it is better explained in the video with the heat maps and other things. So, yeah, suppose I think it will be easier to watch the video again and stop and discuss rather than me drawing different colored boxes, then trying to move those boxes by drawing them again. Let us see the animated version, which you already have. P means hierarchical clustering. I'll share again so that the sound is included.
Going on a quest, on a stat quest. Talking about hierarchical clustering. Hierarchical clustering is often associated with heat maps. If you're not already familiar with what heat maps are, just know that the columns typically represent different samples, and that the rows typically represent measurements from different genes. Red typically signifies high three samples and 4 genes. Here we've got a simple heat map that has 3 samples and 4 genes. For this example, we are just going to cluster or reorder the rows or the genes. Conceptually, the first step is
so genes are just characteristics. Yeah, it could be length, height, width, things like that. So in this sample, there are 3 samples we have taken. So in that, length is different in first sample, different in second sample, and in the third sample it is something else, blue color. Yeah, at the top right corner. So like this, to show the difference of characteristics, difference in this characteristics, different colors are shown. That is why the boxes are of different colors.
Is to figure out which gene is most similar to gene number 1. Genes number 1 and 2 are different. We can tell because the colors are very different. Gene 1 is highly expressed in sample number 1, so it has a red color. Gene 2, however, is not highly expressed in sample number 1, so it has a blue color. In sample number 3, gene 1 is lowly expressed, so it's blue, and gene 2 is highly expressed, so it's red. Genes 1 and 3 are similar, so that means in sample 1, both gene 1 and 3 are red, they're highly expressed, and in sample 3, they're both blue, meaning they're lowly expressed. Genes 1 and 4 are also similar. However, gene number 1 is most similar to gene number 3. So the second step is to figure out what gene is most similar to gene number 2. So we do all the comparisons, and we see that gene number 2 is most similar to gene number 4. And then we do the same thing for gene number 3 and then gene number 4. In step number 3, we look at the different combinations and figure out which 2 genes are the most similar. Once we've done that, we merge them into a cluster.
So which 2 genes would you say are most similar? Depending on the color. Yes. Any guesses? So in sample 1, you have to see which 2 colors are similar. In sample 2, which 2 colors are similar. In sample 3, which 2 colors are similar. In this column, which 2 colors are similar. In this column, which 2 columns are similar. And in column 3, that is sample 3, which 2 colors or which two rows are similar. Yes. Mhm. Simply, which two rows are similar? That is, which two genes are similar? From this color coding, what can you say?
Mm, 1 and 3.
1 and 3. Correct. Correct. Yes. Very good. So let us go further.
In this case, genes number 1 and 3 are more similar than any other combination of genes. So genes 1 and 3 are now cluster number 1. Step 4, go back to step 1, but now treat the new cluster like it's a single gene. So in step 1, we figure out which gene is most similar to cluster number 1. Cluster number 1 is most similar to gene number 4. And we figure out which gene is most similar to gene number 2. In this case, gene number 2 is most similar to gene number 4, but notice that we compared gene number 2 to cluster number 1. Same thing for gene number 4. Of the different combinations, figure out which two genes are the most similar. Now merge them into a cluster. In this case, genes 2 and 4 are the most similar combination. So we've merged them into a cluster. Now we go back to step 1. However, since all we have left are two clusters, we merge them. Bam! We're all done. Hierarchical clustering is usually
So actually, you do not have to merge everything just for the sake of steps, completing the steps. This person has merged everything at the end. So somewhere we have to stop this merging act. Yeah. And take out the clusters formed till then. Okay. Let us see. This diagram towards the right has a very nice name called Dendogram. So how it is formed and what it shows, please observe carefully. Yeah.
usually accompanied by a Dendogram. It indicates both the similarity and the order that the clusters were formed. Cluster number 1 was formed first and is most similar. It has the shortest branch. Cluster number 2 was second and is the second most similar. It has the second shortest branch. Cluster number 3, which contains all of the genes, was formed last. It has the longest branch. Now let's go over a few nitpicky details. Remember the first step? Figure out which gene is most similar to gene number 1? Well, we have to define what most similar means. The method for determining similarity is arbitrarily chosen. However, the Euclidean distance between genes is used a lot. Let's look at an example.
So here is a numerical example where only part of the original data is shown. Yeah, it is a very beautiful explanation. Just listen to.
We'll use a very simple heat map that just has two samples and two genes. Now we're displaying the values that underlie the colors that we have in the heat map. The Euclidean distance between genes 1 and 2 is just the square root of the difference in sample number 1 squared plus the difference in sample number 2 squared. Here we'll just plug in the values for sample number 1. We have 1.6 minus negative 0.5. Now let's plug in the values to calculate the difference in sample number 2. We have 0.5 minus negative 1.9. Doing the subtraction gives us the square root of 2.1 squared plus 2.4 squared. We can think of these values within the parentheses as sides on a triangle. So on the x-axis, we have the distance between gene 1 and gene 2 in sample number 1. And on the y-axis, we have the distance between gene 1 and 2 in sample number 2. The hypotenuse is the distance between genes 1 and 2. The Pythagorean Theorem says that the hypotenuse equals the square root of x squared plus y squared. In this case, that means the square root of 2.1 squared plus 2.4 squared. And that gives us 3.2, the distance between gene number 1 and gene number 2. When we have more samples, we just extend the equation. It's no big deal. The Euclidean distance is just 1.
Yes. So then what we will do is the distance between two genes, so to say, we calculated, and for whichever two pairs of genes, the distance is smallest, we will cluster them together. Yeah. And we will keep drawing that dendogram to show the sequence of clustering. Yeah. So for example, say this is like this. Suppose. Yeah, and we found that 3 genes or 3 sets of these characteristics fall together. So we say club the first 3, and then the remaining 2 were found to be similar. So we will draw a dendogram like this. Yeah, showing that we moved and clustered the first 3 genes together first. Yeah. Then the next 2. Yeah. That is, then the next 2 happened. Yeah. Then everything was clustered together. So this nearer edge shows that these three are closest to each other. Even though we have clustered the remaining 2 next, but they are not that close to each other. Okay, so this clustering happened first, the nearer one happened first, then this happened, then at the end this happened. Yeah. It is not necessary to cluster everything together at the end. Somewhere in the process of clustering, we'll have to stop. Yeah. And numerically, how to calculate how 2 genes are similar, that also we saw. So this is all about hierarchical clustering. So in clustering, the 2 most important methods are k-means clustering, which we saw like this. K-means clustering and hierarchical clustering. So this is about clustering. We saw an example also through this video. Yeah. Now, what is remaining is a quick revision of neural networks. So what is happening in neural networks basically, let me try to draw. Then again, the video is much better. The 3 blue, 1 brown video you might have seen also. So what is happening in neural networks? So there is a series of input. And the output is far. In between there are hidden layers. Okay. So the hidden layer 1. So hidden layer 1. Each of these nodes, say, in hidden layer 1 will take input from this input layer. Yeah. And it will attach a weight, say 0.6. From here, it will attach, say, 0.2. Things like that. It is not necessary that every input will go to every node in the hidden layer. So it will happen something like this. Yeah. Yeah. So these weights are there. So depending on that weight, some of the information will be transferred to the hidden layer 1. Then there could be another hidden layer. Yeah. Yeah. So there will be number of such hidden layers. Finally, the output. Yeah. Finally, the output we will get. In each layer, there will be such weights and there will be such connections. Not every node in the previous layer will be connected to the every node in the subsequent layer. So yeah, finally, we will have some sort of output. See, in output options, this becomes an output. Yeah. So all these things are decided by trial and error. First of all, what will be these weights? And from this input, whether it should go to this node or whether it should go to this node or whether it should go to this node. So all these things, how many hidden layers should be there? Yeah. In each hidden layer, what should be the weights? What should be the weights here? What should be the weights here? All this is decided by the feedback we receive in number of trials. So we'll run this trial once. We will see whether the output we got is the correct output. Yeah, the user will define whether it is the correct output. If it is the correct output, then fine, the weights will remain as it is. Otherwise, the weights will change. Initially, just on trial basis. Yeah. Then the system will compare whether the changed weight is giving us the correct output. The user will again give feedback. Yeah. So this in a way is called back propagation. Giving of feedback by the user is called back propagation. Sorry, let me remove this one. Back propagation in neural network. So again, all the weights will be recalculated, all the connections will be recalculated to make the prediction better, in an effort to make the prediction better. So this, even if this is done by computer, many times training the neural network requires weeks. Just imagine a computer, a sufficiently powerful computer is taking weeks to actually program itself in neural networks. Computer works so fast, right? Even a billion digit number will be multiplied by another billion digit number in a second. Yeah. So that kind of computer is taking weeks to program itself, to train itself in a particular artificial neural network. Yeah. So that is what happens in neural network through first these random allocation of weights, then depending on feedback, the weights are calculated and the whole system recalculates the outcome and again waits for a feedback. Yeah. So this goes on happening. Yeah. So this is what artificial neural network is about. Yeah. And its application is there everywhere. For this, the requirement is, of course, the data's size should be huge. Yeah, and it will take time to train the network. So the time available should also be there. Yeah, a couple of weeks or a couple of days. So this is about artificial neural network. Let's quickly have a look at the three blue, one brown video also. Because there is simply no match of this channel, of this quality of these videos.
This is a 3. It's sloppily written and rendered at an extremely low resolution of 28 by 28 pixels, but your brain has no trouble recognizing it as a 3. And I want you to take a moment to appreciate how crazy it is that brains can do this so effortlessly. I mean, this, and this are also recognizable as 3s, even though the specific values of each pixel is very different from one image to the next. The particular light-sensitive cells in your eye that are firing when you see this 3 are very different from the ones firing when you see this 3. But something in that crazy smart visual cortex of yours resolves these as representing the same idea, while at the same time recognizing other images as their own distinct ideas. But if I told you, hey, sit down and write for me a program that takes in a grid of 28 by 28 pixels like this, and outputs a single number between 0 and 10, telling you what it thinks the digit is, well, the task goes from comically trivial to dauntingly difficult. Unless you've been living under a rock, I think I hardly need to motivate the relevance and importance of machine learning and neural networks to the present and to the future. But what I want to do here is show you what a neural network actually is, assuming no background, and to help visualize what it's doing. Not as a buzzword, but as a piece of math. My hope is just that you come away feeling like the structure itself is motivated, and to feel like you know what it means when you read or you hear about a neural network quote-unquote learning. This video is just going to be devoted to the structure component of that, and the following one is going to tackle learning. What we're going to do is put together a neural network that can learn to recognize handwritten digits. This is a somewhat classic example for introducing the topic, and I'm happy to stick with the status quo here, because at the end of the two videos, I want to point you to a couple good resources where you can learn more, and where you can download the code that does this and play with it on your own computer. There are many variants of neural networks, and in recent years there's been sort of a boom in research towards these variants, but in these two introductory videos, you and I are just going to look at the simplest plain vanilla form with no added frills. This is kind of a necessary prerequisite for understanding any of the more powerful modern variants, and trust me, it still has plenty of complexity for us to wrap our minds around. But even in this simplest form, it can learn to recognize handwritten digits, which is a pretty cool thing for a computer to be able to do. And at the same time, you'll see how it does fall short of a couple hopes that we might have for it. As the name suggests, neural networks are inspired by the brain. But let's break that down. What are the neurons, and in what sense are they linked together? Right now, when I say neuron, all I want you to think about is a thing that holds a number. Specifically, a number between 0 and 1. It's really not more than that. For example, the network starts with a bunch of neurons corresponding to each of the 28 times 28 pixels of the input image, which is 784 neurons in total. Each one of these holds a number that represents the grayscale value of the corresponding pixel, ranging from 0 for black pixels up to 1 for white pixels. This number inside the neuron is called its activation. And the image you might have in mind here is that each neuron is lit up when its activation is a high number. So all of these 784 neurons make up the first layer of our network. Now jumping over to the last layer, this has 10 neurons, each representing one of the digits. The activation in these neurons, again some number that's between 0 and 1, represents how much the system thinks that a given image corresponds with a given digit. There's also a couple layers in between, called the hidden layers, which for the time being should just be a giant question mark for how on earth this process of recognizing digits is going to be handled. In this network, I chose 2 hidden layers, each one with 16 neurons, and admittedly, that's kind of an arbitrary choice. To be honest, I chose 2 layers based on how I want to motivate the structure in just a moment. And 16? Well, that was just a nice number to fit on the screen. In practice, there is a lot of room for experiment with a specific structure here. The way the network operates, activations in one layer determine the activations of the next layer. And of course, the heart of the network, as an information processing mechanism, comes down to exactly how those activations from one layer bring about activations in the next layer. It's meant to be loosely analogous to how in biological networks of neurons, some groups of neurons firing cause certain others to fire. Now the network I'm showing here has already been trained to recognize digits, and let me show you what I mean by that. It means if you feed in an image, lighting up all 784 neurons of the input layer according to the brightness of each pixel in the image, that pattern of activations causes some very specific pattern in the next layer, which causes some pattern in the one after it, which finally gives some pattern in the output layer. And the brightest neuron of that output layer is the network's choice, so to speak, for what digit this image represents. And before jumping into the math for
Yes. So that gives a clear picture of how neural networks work. Yeah, of course, it will be very difficult to simulate with pen and paper. So as I discussed earlier, we won't be discussing examples of that. Like what we discussed for clustering and decision trees, and even regression. Regression that, of course, we have studied in more detail. Yeah, non-linear and logistic we got introduced to today. So this completes our machine learning models and also effectively this part of the course, business analytics. First, we discussed basic statistics, starting from measures of central tendency, measures of dispersion, what is a correlation, what is a regression, how to find out how good the regression line is, that is calculation of R square. So all those basic things we discussed. Then we devoted around 3 sessions for machine learning models, and we focused on the 4 machine learning models, 4 main machine learning models. Yeah. So this completes a fairly wholesome introduction to business analytics. Yeah, little bit of data warehousing will be discussed in the MDP, Management Development Program, which will take place on 15th. Yeah. So this is all about this course. Yeah. So any doubts, any remarks? Of course, when you're practicing through the videos, I expect you to practice through the videos only, not anything too much. Yeah. So even some part of the videos, any of the videos, if you have watched twice and you're not, then you can suggest, you can that a doubt clearing session. So we will have it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll stop sharing. And today's MDP by Nayak sir, Professor Nayak, will start at 6 p.m. as everybody suggested.
Yeah. Weekend 6 o'clock. Yes.
Yes, in the timetable also it was there. So
Yeah.
6 p.m. Okay. So all the best. It was a very nice experience for me to discuss these things with
So
you.
one question for this business analysis. Can you get the question bank or type of questions we'll get in the exam? Because
Yes. I'll prepare the question bank. Yeah. So some before midterms portion, you have an idea because you have
yeah.
midterm question paper. And this machine learning models part, I will give a couple of questions, 20, 25 questions around. I'll give.
Okay. No problem. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Thank,
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much. See you.
thank you. Thank you. Bye.